CaesarBusiness.com podcast with Tony Rourke and Kevin O'Flaherty.
CaesarBusiness.com, making you money.
Share it on Facebook, share it on LinkedIn,
Twitter, our blogs, YouTube videos, listen to our podcast. It's so hot that it's burning up the stereo.
Welcome to the CaesarBusiness.com podcast. My name is Kevin O'Flaherty from O'Flaherty Law. I'm joined today by Joe Belmonte from Vocomotive Inc. And our topic today is going to be building a company culture. So thanks for your time today, Joe. I appreciate you joining me.
Welcome, my pleasure.
So tell me about Vocomotive Inc. and what it is and a little bit about its backstory.
Well, we are definitely a most unique company. We're a unique company within a unique niche. What we do is we are rehabilitation counselors, and we specialize in facilitating the placement of people who have had career-ending injuries. So most of our services are vended to large insurance companies, third-party administrators, self-insured employers, and as you can imagine, we're dealing with some very large kinds of companies in the provision of those services. And what happens is when the businesses that they insure or the businesses that they operate sustain a sizable workers' compensation loss, those individuals may not be able to come back to full duty function. The companies may not be able to find alternative work for these injured workers, and now they have a very large financial exposure on a compensation case.
Okay.
And in Illinois, there is a provision for vocational rehabilitation in the law, and either the injured worker, who is referred to as the petitioner, or the respondent, the insurance company, the agent for the employer, or the employer directly, can initiate a referral for vocational rehabilitation. And when they do, we get involved in meeting with and interviewing the injured worker. We will implement some vocational testing. We will complete a comprehensive evaluation, and then we set about the task of getting them off the workers' compensation rolls and back into some productive role in the workplace. And the benefit to the insurance company or the employer is that they get an opportunity to mitigate or reduce their exposures for a total disability, or perhaps offset the exposures for a long-term wage loss that the worker might be subject to. And the benefit to the injured worker is that they are more readily and effectively restored to a position of financial independence, less dependency upon the medical system, hopefully less of the negative consequences of being off on a disability, potential addictions to medication, longer-term medical care that might not be necessary, and they are restored back to financial independence. And become good little taxpayers, which is what the state of Illinois wants people to be as much as possible.
Sure.
So that's what we do, and because we brought to that particular table a lot of disability case management expertise. I grew up in public sector organizations serving people with mental illness and developmental disabilities in publicly funded agencies. So I got to see a very wide diversity of disability diagnoses, if you will.
Okay.
And I'm a salesman by temperament, and getting people jobs was something that I was good at because I like to deal with employers because I understand what they have to go through to find good help.
Sure, I've dealt with that myself.
It's tough for everybody, and as a business owner, you face a whole nother level of that. But we have, because of our high level expertise, the fact that we were operating in courtrooms all the time, we now also are referred cases regularly by both defense and plaintiff in civil litigation. Where there are lost time, or perhaps somebody, may have been injured such that there's now a serious question as to whether they'll ever work again. And now you have to assess damages. So you may need a good vocational rehabilitation evaluator to do that. We're also working in other litigation-related markets. So for example, if a couple is going through a divorce, maybe the wife was the one who stayed out of the workplace and raised the children, And now there's a question as to what kind of support she may be entitled to. We do vocational evaluations in those contexts. We have for a long time provided pro bono services to veterans and some homeless people from time to time, or other special needs individuals that we run into. So now we're working with veterans on a larger scale, and we're going to be taking our experience very heavily into the market now for all of these developmentally disabled or cognitively disabled young adults who are going to be graduating from high school, but don't have some of the traditional pathways available to them to develop alternative work experience, and some of whom may not have been properly assessed, and it may be unclear as to whether they will ever be able to work. And you're going to need something beyond a typical school system or educational evaluation in order to make those kinds of determinations. So, we have kind of an unusual niche and an unusual skill and experience set that allows us to go in a lot of different directions. And one of the things about us is we have a real passion for doing what we do. We really like to make a difference in the lives of the individuals that we serve. And I have been very fortunate to be able to attract and train a group of very dedicated people, who really buy into the mission. And that has really been a gift for me in my life, to be able to run a business that I actually have a passion for running, which is a good thing because I work a lot of hours and have traditionally done so to build this business, but it's been a gift.
So that segues nicely into our topic, which is building a company culture. And something that you were talking about is building that culture when you've got more than, a couple of employees that you can just instill the culture into by being present all the time.
Right.
Tell me your experience in that.
Well, for years we were for years I was essentially a one-man shop, working out of my basement. I had a wonderful little home office that I set up, and given the amount of business intake that I was doing, and I was almost exclusively dedicated to work comp at that time, I could manage a sizable caseload and keep the whole thing going. But eventually my vision for the business began to change, and I realized that I really needed to break out of the box that I and my competitors basically lived in, and I wanted to design a completely different kind of vocational rehabilitation practice that integrated training and social adjustment and computer literacy. As I was seeing all the deficits that people had when it came to looking for work, especially after an unwanted career change, I realized that just all of the traditional models that we have weren't working. So I needed to grow the business. And I eventually hired one person who was and still is my right arm in the business. And up until the time that we were about 3 or 4 people, everything was wonderful.
I remember those nice days for my own business.
Right. Yeah. And you know how that goes, because, you hire people. The job is still real small at that point in time. So, you break out a few duties, you delegate it. Eventually you get a little bit busier, and that person's job becomes a full-time job. And then you find maybe you need an administrative support person. So you hire that person, and, they start by answering the phones and doing the filing. But before you know it, they're into other things. And now you have an administrative person on a full-time basis. And then in our case, I hired a job developer who was going to go out and develop relationships with employers. And he started out by just helping out with clients and doing a little filing and answering the phones. But, now he is involved in the supervision of other people. So what happened was we became victims of our own success. And we hit about 4 or 5 people, and we had a modest business intake every month. Usually existing on, maybe 5 or 6 new assignments every 30 days. But we got really good at what we were doing, and we got really good at putting people back to work, and eventually word sort of got out. And what happened to me specifically was it was literally a January, and I didn't get a little bit more work that month. I got 4 times the normal work that month. And I thought, wow, what a great month.
Yeah,
January is a great month. And then in February, the same thing happened. and we got 4 to 5 times our normal referral base. And I thought, wow, 2 months in a row, I'm set for the next 6 months. And then the third month, the same thing happened. And now the conversation with myself was, oh my God, I'm in trouble. Because we had a lot more work than we could do. It was 70 hours a week for the next 5 years, just gangbusters. And I eventually grew the business to 27 staff.
Wow.
But we grew so quickly that I did not have time to learn how to manage people at that level.
You could be telling my story right now too, but go on.
Well, so what was missing was just the building in of thorough job descriptions, evaluating how everybody was going to be accountable to one another, how people were going to interact with one another, and reviews of staff for performance, creating a billing department, managing the inevitable human resource issues that come up, buying insurance for the company. I was always a benevolent employer. I provided health insurance and disability coverages for people because I saw what happened when people didn't have these things. So it got to the point where we were making money, but there was a lot of there was dissension in the ranks.
Sure, I've been through that myself.
Yeah, and there were little factions that were splitting up. And one day I got up and I went to an attorney's office to interview a client, and I'm after I'm done with this man that I'd known professionally for years just all of a sudden just said to me, "So how are things going for you?" And he was telling me that his office was extremely efficient, and he had made all of his financial goals by October, and he didn't have any major staffing issues, and he was going to shut his office down between Christmas and New Year's. I'm sorry about that. That's my phone. And take his whole staff to Acapulco. And I said, "Oh my God, I'm missing something." And he gave me the name of a consultant, which I hired. But one of the things that I realized that I had not taken the time to do, because how was I going to get all this done?
Sure.
At the end of the day, I was tired. I wanted to go home to be with my wife and kids. But I realized that as a manager and a company owner, because I had not taken the time to build those steps in organically as we developed, that I was now a victim of those inefficiencies. And so we had to basically slow the whole organization down a little bit and examine the relationships that we had with one another, not only on a professional level in terms of who interacted with who and what was important about those interactions, but what happened when somebody didn't see something as being important. So I may have had a manager who saw a set of activities as very important, which they were, but some of her subordinates didn't necessarily have the same priorities. And then there would be conflict. And then it was a matter of, okay, who gets to set the authorities? And, how do we work for one another's benefit? And how do we have conflict, which, you're going to have conflict. But how do we have conflict that's productive and not negative? Where you basically have people who are digging their heels in, and I think fundamentally it's a very simple issue. Who lets their ego get in the way of the job? When does it become about me and not about the benefit of the organization and the benefit of my teammates? So we had to do a lot of work around that, and a lot of that centered around me and how was I going to take the steps necessary to do that? Because, hey, I'm the boss. I own the joint. I decide whether you stay or whether you go.
The buck stops with you. If there's problems in the
Right.
organization, they're your problems.
Right, and I had to acknowledge that really the deficits were of my own creation and born out of my own strengths and weaknesses.
Mm-hmm.
So the first thing that I really had to do was examine myself and my own character and decide how I wanted to be as a manager and as a company, and how I wanted people to thrive in my organization.
So let's dig into that. What were some of the changes you made to yourself as a manager before you even started trying to affect this change with the organization?
Well, the hardest thing for me to do was to realize that I thought I was delegating, but I really hadn't delegated anything. Because in the end, I was kind of afraid to let go of my little business baby, you know. But among the first things that I had to do was I had to examine who I had that I knew was competent and loyal. And I had to have a conversation with them about, what it is they really wanted from me. And it was very hard for them because it was hard for them to tell me where I wasn't meeting their needs because they didn't want to tell me, Joe, you're not doing your job.
Sure.
Okay. So I had to do a little work with them to get them comfortable enough to be able to speak to me honestly so that we could identify the problems and that I could see the problems their way. And once we got that step done, then I was able to say, okay, now that we've been frank with one another and I know what it is that you want and we agree upon basically, how if we do these things, the company is going to advance, then I gave them a title. And I basically said, okay, we're going to set up your job the way you want it to be and the way I think it needs to be for the benefit of the company. And I built in the accountabilities. And I said, now these are the numbers that you're going to be judged by in terms of performance. And they contributed to that process. And the other thing that we built into our process was that when you had conflict with another worker, there were certain things that were unacceptable, okay? And one of them was disrespecting a coworker. But, human beings screw stuff up. Mm-hmm. So we also developed a lot of forgiveness kind of protocols. But the bottom line was that if you snapped at somebody or you missed a deadline that somebody was expecting from you, or if you didn't do what you were advised to do, you had to go to them personally and clean that up. And part of the review process for my staff on a periodic basis was not only are you getting your job done and meeting your metrics, but are you a vocomotive person in the sense that you are committed to the team first and the group benefit first?
That's got to be tough to measure. In a performance review, how do you judge whether you're a vocomotive person?
Well, we set up we all got together and we set up a rating system. And it was, it was things like, do you do what you're going to say you're going to do? And of course, we had to build that around things that were important to the company. So, for example, if we set a deadline that after we did an evaluation, we were going to be responsible for turning in reports within 10 days, that was one of our guidelines, then what happens when you don't?
That's something I struggle with. What happens when they don't?
Okay. So if the person who's in charge of making sure those reports are done on a timely basis sends you an email or has a conversation with you about it, then it's a matter of how are you accounting for your not meeting your obligations, mm-hmm. and how are you interacting with the person who's reminding you of the fact that you're not meeting your commitments, so you're not meeting your metrics. So it took a little work, and admittedly it was somewhat arbitrary. But we also, we decided that people had to have permission to confront somebody if their behavior was inappropriate. And that took a little getting used to. I did have to lose, I'm going to say about 10% of my staff. Some people just couldn't get with that game plan. They either didn't like being confronted, or they didn't like confronting others. And when I say confront, I don't mean in a belligerent or.
But this report doesn't get done. The person who's supposed to be taking the report has to do something about it, as opposed to just kind of letting that slide.
Right.
So well, everything gets.
What you have to do is the first thing you examine is, okay, what's your reason for things not getting done? Is it because, maybe the workload is really heavy and you're just inevitably going to be behind? And that's okay, except that it's your responsibility to tell us that your workload is such that you can't get the job done. And if you didn't ask for help, then we need to talk about that. And there were actually situations like that where we had to put people on probation. And we had just about everybody on probation at one point in time, which initially made them very uncomfortable, because people feel threatened in their jobs
Sure.
sometimes. So part of what we had to do was also to give people a comfort level in saying, look, nobody's gunning for you here. Okay, we're not looking to get rid of you, but we've got to meet critical company requirements. Because if there's a breakdown, the customer sees it, it's an adverse impact on the business. You strain your coworkers.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, somebody has to scramble. We have to fix things. It's better if we don't break them to begin with. And I had to do a number of trainings. One of my trainings was we had a training with the staff called Say No to Joe Day.
I'm curious about this.
Yeah, and what we did with that was, for example, somebody would present an issue to me, and I would write a memo, and I would say, okay, from now on, the policy is this. And then 2 weeks later, I'd forgotten that I wrote that memo.
I have that. I'm going through this right now, and I have that exact problem. It's trying to affect systems. You got to know what the systems actually are that you just affected. So
right.
Go on.
And of course, all this is going by you in real time. Right. So, all of a sudden a customer would call and they'd say, oh, Joe, I need this, that, or the other thing. And in real time, I made a decision and I violated my protocol.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And what would happen was my management or my coworkers would not say anything about that. They said, well, Joe's the manager. He can do what he wants. Well, no, I can't, because I'm having a negative impact that rolls downhill.
Sure.
So I had to go through about 60 days of people really coming in my face and saying, oh, by the way, Joe, when you did that, you overrode a previous decision, and here's what happened as a result of that. And they took them time to get used to that, but I eventually got to the point where my staff was able to very reasonably and appropriately believe what I told them, which was that my door was open and that they could criticize my performance. And it took a while. It took about a year, actually. But especially my senior managers got very comfortable with that. And then they learned that they could do it. And when they were right, I was going to acknowledge them. And when I was wrong, and if I didn't react emotionally, because maybe I was irritable on the day you said something to me, and maybe I was inclined, and I can be very much in my zone sometimes, where I'm in the office and somebody will interrupt me and I'm growling. Okay, well, that's not right.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so that was the kind of thing where there was a discussion that had to be held with me about how I show up at the office. Am I negative? If somebody really screwed something up and it costs us money. Do I react in anger, before I ask the questions? Am I forgiving? Am I open? And one of the things that I didn't like about the corporate world when I was in it was that I didn't really feel sometimes part of the team. And I wanted an esprit de corps in my organization. I wanted people to be comfortable, because here's what I found. Most people want to do a good job.
Yeah. And
they like the attaboys. And they want achievement. And they want recognition. Money doesn't always satisfy that.
Mm-hmm.
So I really wanted to develop a culture that focused on those things. So that was just an example of stuff that I had to go through. And actually going through that helped me better guide my other staff people who had their own issues and confrontations. With that kind of thing. One of my most senior managers is a guy that one time I had to tell him, look, on any given day, we never know who you are. Are you the good guy or are you the bad guy? And I said, if you're not going to be able to get control over going dark, you're going to have to go out. And I said,
it's a tough conversation
before we take this to the point of a probation and a mandatory expectation for change in 30 days or else, what do you want to do? And, he had a lot of, he'd gone through the forgiveness cycle numerous times. But eventually it got to the point where, he was having trouble making the adjustment. And, and he just looked me in the eye and he said, you're absolutely right. I'm not entitled to that. And he's a trusted member of my team to this day, and I'm really glad that that we put him through that ringer, and I went through that ringer because now nobody's a social security number to me. We're too small for that.
Yeah, it's clear that you care about your staff having good lives and a good work environment, and that shows in their work. When people are happy to come to work because they're part of a team, that really comes through to everyone they're doing business with. So it's just such a daunting thing. I mean, I'm going through, like I said, something similar right now, where we grew from 3 employees, including myself, a couple of years ago, to a staff of 14, and trying to put systems in place is the easy part. Creating the systems is the easy part. Having people actually follow those systems and monitoring that they're actually being done correctly and holding people accountable for not doing them correctly or on time, that's where it gets really challenging. And, sometimes I feel like I'm playing business whack-a-mole, where, okay, I've got this system working right, people are following it. Oh, now there's a breakdown over here, so I got to go and deal with this. But there's always too many breakdowns to address personally by myself. So I think the smart thing that you did was get your senior managers on board right away and have them be kind of real lieutenants. Or maybe
No, that was absolutely critical, because you're right, and that whack-a-mole is a good thing. I mean, literally, there was a day I came into the office and I was so aggravated with everything that I had created that I literally was thinking, I just want to fire them all. And yet those breakdowns weren't really theirs. I mean, they were theirs, okay, but they were also mine, and it was just a result of an inefficient team. And like you say, it's the accountabilities are the real challenge, and the real blessing is if you can get people to the point where they are willing to expose the vulnerabilities, because people don't like to look bad, and when they screw something up, it's not that they want to hide it necessarily, but it's like they don't want to look bad.
Yeah.
And one of the games we played was, we called it Find the Cracks. And what we did was, we got really weird with some of this stuff, but we went out, we bought all these little fractured pieces of glass. They had cracks in them and they broke easily. And what we did was, we created a token reward system where people actually got cash by finding breakdowns in procedure.
Okay. That's a cool. I've never heard of that.
It was wild, because I mean, literally, when we announced this program, we had one guy that raised his hand and he said, "So let me get this straight." He said, "You want me to raise my hand, and you want me to volunteer that I regularly screw up here?" And he said, "And there's going to be no repercussions for my screwing up. You're actually going to give me something for this." And I said, "Yes. Why do I want that information?" I said, "Because we don't know where the holes are."
Right, that's the problem I'm going through right now.
Okay.
Until the ship is sinking, you can't, you don't know that things are going wrong.
Right. And, his job is occurring in real time for him, too. So, he gets his marching orders, okay, and he gets his little piece of paper that tells him what he's supposed to do, and he goes off and he does it. And he doesn't necessarily have time to sit back and think about all of this, too, because, he's doing the whack-a-mole on his job at his level.
Mm-hmm.
Okay? But when we started to look at things, it would be like, something as simple as, how do we keep missing calendaring a deposition on a timely basis? Who's missing that? Why is that getting missed? And then when you went out and you found out, somebody would say, "Well, I thought that the procedure was that I would notify so-and-so was the only one allowed to make changes to the calendar. Or I didn't have authority to get into that portion of the calendar." Well, okay, that's why it wasn't getting done. But they didn't know that other people didn't know. And then people would be looking at me and I would go, "Wait a minute, I don't know what your job is. I'm not doing your job every day."
Right.
"Yeah, but you're the boss." Well, let's get something straight. I don't know everything. So we had to build in the structures and, like you say, the accountabilities. And actually, that little program worked out really well for us, because we ran it for a quarter. And what we wound up doing with that was, we then figured out that we needed to completely re-examine our training modalities, And since we have a training manual that goes task by task for everything everybody does, everybody wound up rewriting those components of those functions. And we wound up it's not that we still don't have them all crop up once in a while, but there aren't 40 of them. Now we're down to 5 maybe, and we can whack those pretty effectively without a lot of fallout. It's when you got too much going on that it becomes a problem.
Well, and I ask this only because I'm going to probably implement it this afternoon, but the find the cracks thing, how did you? What were the logistics of how that worked? Did somebody just say, "Oh, here's what's going wrong in this system. Give me $20," or was it they were responsible for actually saying, "I found a problem in the system. I fixed it. I rewrote the manual on it, and now we're doing it differently." What was in practice? How did that process work?
Well, I wasn't the one who closely orchestrated it, but basically what we did was we wanted people to volunteer where they felt that there was some procedural breakdown in what they were doing, no matter how minuscule it might seem. But if it was something that was causing them an irritation or a slowdown or a disruption in workflow or confusion, okay, or if they had an interaction with somebody and they would go to them and that person would look and go, well, I don't think that's my job. I think that's so-and-so's job. Mm-hmm. And what that meant was there was lack of clarity.
Sure.
Okay, because then we'd go to so-and-so and they go, no, that's not my job either. I don't know why he thinks that's my job. So we had those kinds of things that were going on. And then what we did was every time they came and they reported a breakdown, we were keeping a sheet, a log sheet, and we would give them one of these pieces of glass. Okay, and that was the token. And for every so many pieces of glass, I mean, the money that we gave out, we're playing for, it's like, nickel bingo or something like that, okay? They might have gotten $30 out of the whole thing. So it was not a big expense to the company. But what got interesting was they were eventually competing with each other to find things. Okay, and once they got into it, it was like, we'd have these little meetings, and it was like, oh, wait, look what I found. Okay, and then at the end of the game, we just simply did a little tally up, and we gave out some cash, and we gave out some prizes, like a gift card or just here's a $5 gift certificate to Dunkin' Donuts or something like that. And you know what? We found some things that weren't all that significant, but we found other things that were, and it resulted in a lot of cleanup. But most importantly, it resulted in the staff coming to a recognition that things that weren't working, however they were showing up, were things that required attention.
Sure.
And once they got into that mode and they could clean things up, it got a lot easier for them to be able to walk into the boss's office and just say, hey, I want to let you know, I ran into this yesterday. I think we need to look at that. And that may be all that was necessary to whack that mole and never have him come up again. So it was very creative things. I wish I could say I was the one that came up with all of this. I was not. These are things that other people in my organization came up with as a means of dealing with these issues. Some of them were driven by our consultant, but all of them were a little fun.
So the consultant was sounds like that was a real smart move by you to actually trust somebody else to help you with the problem solving. Is that something that you worked? Did you work with that consultant on an ongoing basis for a long time?
I had her around for about 5 years.
Oh.
She was sort of on the payroll. Every month she got a check, and but I remember the first conversation after 90 days of her interviewing everybody and everybody being really on edge about who's this person who's interviewing us and what's going to happen and what's he up to and all of that kind of stuff. I remember she sat down with me and she said, are you ready to hear what it is you need to do? And I looked at her and I said, I'm paying you. Why would you think I'm not? And she said, you'd be surprised how some people sort of think they want to do this until they realize what it's really going to take.
And they
and
get
she said,
defensive.
there's going to be a cost to you. You're the guy who's going to have to stand up and acknowledge your vulnerabilities. And I'll give you one very creative thing we did. We had two people who were not getting along. And I mean, they were not getting along. I could not put them in the same room together. There would be tension. I could not assign them to projects together because of the conflict. And, you just sort of got into the habit of saying, well, so-and-so and so-and-so don't get along. And we shouldn't have them work together. But you know what? That's not optional.
Mm-hmm.
So coming from a traditional background, I was kind of concerned about who we were going to have to terminate and all the documentation that we were going to have to go through to terminate somebody. And my consultant did something I thought was brilliant. And she said to me, we're not doing any of that stuff. She said, this is what we're going to do, and I'll tell you how this worked out. I set up a meeting with them both at 2 o'clock one afternoon. They come walking into the conference room, and I'm sitting there, and I said, look, I want you to know that I respect both of you. You are both good workers. You are both good at your jobs. But you guys can't get along for the benefit of the team. I said there's perpetually conflict. There's irritability. You express it to me about each other. And I said, here's what I'm going to do. And I pushed a couple of forms across the table to both of them. And I said, you have 30 minutes to resolve your issues. And if you cannot come to a joint agreement that you are going to treat each other with respect and work for the benefit of the team, I want both of your resignations at 2:30 this afternoon.
Wow.
And I began to get up out of my chair, and one of my team, and I knew who it was going to be in advance because you can sometimes psych these things out, she said, stop. And she looked across the way at the other person, and she said, whatever I have done, however I have been, I apologize right now because I like working here, and I really don't have any issues with you, but obviously things aren't working, and I do not want this to go forward. The other person resigned. I didn't have to terminate anybody.
And you got to keep the right one.
Well, I don't know that the other one was maybe she was the wrong one for the moment. Maybe she was going through something of a personal nature that she couldn't get past. I don't know. I don't want to be harsh in my judgments. But I didn't have to fire anybody.
Yeah.
And that definitively, when those things kind of happen, because people do talk, it set the tone of, we're not fooling around. You will be granted forgiveness. Because they both had the chance.
Yeah.
Okay? An equal chance. I would have let both of them go.
Sure.
Okay? But I didn't have to make the choice.
That's a King Solomon sort of move you just played. That's
I wish
impressive.
I thought of it. It wasn't my idea, and in a million years I wouldn't have thought of it. But now that I've seen it done, it was like there are other ways. So those are some interesting experiences that I had, and I spent a lot of money on this. But I do not regret it because the organization is efficient. People genuinely care for one another, and it's as fine a workplace as I think I will ever be in at this point in time. And I got great people.
Well, thank you so much for sharing your wisdom with me today, Joe. You're giving me a ray of hope that there's a light at the end of the tunnel if I follow your path a little bit, because I'm kind of in the middle of what you went through and doing a lot of the same things that you did. And it's growing pains are a bitch. But
well, I got about 30 years on you, and I got to tell you this: I wish I would have come to see some of these things far sooner. But you know what? You're trained as a lawyer. I'm trained as a rehab counselor. We're not trained in HR. We're not trained in billing. We're not trained in IT. Mm-hmm. But we have to do all those things as small businessmen, and we can't possibly be good at it. And what we should, for me, I'm a mentor and I'm a trainer and I'm a persuader. I'm not a drill sergeant. I had to find the people in my team that had the sergeant capabilities and let them have at it, so that I didn't delegate my strengths, but I also had to let go. And And we got to go to other people for what we don't know, because I did not have the answers for myself. And I remember before my consultant hired me, or I hired her, and she said she kept contacting me to try to get the work, right? And the thing that she said that sold me was one day she said to me, "So who do you talk to?" And I realized I wasn't talking to anybody.
Yeah, that's the
I was
problem.
all alone with this problem. Typical guy thing, right?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And then the light went off, and I go, "That's right. I'm not talking to anybody." I mean, if I wanted to learn how to play basketball, I'd hire a coach. Why haven't I hired a coach? It didn't occur.
Well, thanks for sharing your wisdom with me today, Joe. If somebody wants to reach you, how can they reach you?
I'm old school. Call me. 630-789-2519. Look us up on the web. It's vocamotive.com. And I am more than willing to share this, with anybody, because at the end of the day, I think in one way or another, we're all doing God's work. And good business people serve the community, and we can serve each other, and we can help each other out, because there's more than enough business to go around for everybody. And if we do it right, by and large, we'll be fine.
Thanks, Joe. Great to have you on.
Thank you.